Hey! All right, making a game for Railscamp. So what I lack in default Keynote template, hopefully I make up for in animation. But we'll see how we go. Going after Nick and Michael's talk, beautiful talk, so quite intimidating. All right, Railscamp, making a game for Railscamp. Yeah, Railscamp. What is a Railscamp? Show of hands, who here's been to Railscamp before? Railscamp, yeah, great. It's an opportunity to mingle with your like-minded Rubyists and stare off at sunsets and contemplate our Ruby style guide and those sorts of things. Realistically, it's probably an opportunity to sit around a bunch of computers and sling some code. And there's werewolves and there's cheese. So that's what to expect. Railscamp! Woo! Yeah. So a brief history lesson. Who here went to the 2009 Railscamp? 2009? 2 people. Pat, Xavier?
Where was it?
I don't know, somewhere. Melbourne. Great. So there was a game called Brains, written by. Did anyone here write Brains? Write Brains, maybe? No. There you go. So it was written by Chris Lloyd and a bunch of other people, but basically it was kind of a bit of a programming game designed to bring people together, whereby Melbourne's under attack by zombies. You write like a little a Ruby application to as a robot to defend the zombies. You've got to shoot the zombies and do good things and survive, etc., etc. But basically, it's kind of like a little bit of a programming game. So inspired by this, in 2011, I shamelessly ripped off the Google AI Challenge of the Year. They used to run these every year. Google's become self-aware and since doesn't need community input for AI anymore. But there was this whole ants thing, so I wrote like a Ruby binding for it, and I wrote a program where you could kind of upload scripts, and yeah, it was a bit of fun. In 2012, I had another crack at it, and this was a little game called Treasure Wars, and you would go and pick up treasure and that sort of stuff. Great game, should have been there. 2012 Railscamp. But then, crickets, or tumbleweeds, or nothing, the Great Desert. And I'm like, 2019, going to Railscamp, this is going to be great, I'm going to make something. I'm going to make something fun, hard to master, start conversations, easy to play, but also familiar to people. But Mike, you're an idiot. Yes, I am an idiot. Because Mike runs a new bank called Up. Mike works at a company called Ferocia, where we build Bendigo Bank's internet banking platform. Mike has a serious Mario Kart addiction. Mike runs a successful side business called Foundation, which helps people find their cosmetics online. Ask me anything. Great. Oh, and I've got two kids. Okay. I'll make something buildable in 4 evenings. So that was kind of my constraint. Time is the constraint. And so the little game I chose to bring people together that was hard to master, fun, to start conversations, easy to play, was, animations, Snake, 2019. So I started work on this little repo. And basically it's the game of Snake, whereby you can simply move north, south, east or west. If you pick up food, you grow. I also added like a custom feature whereby every 5 ticks you sort of grow by 1 space, because if you couldn't pick up food, then you wouldn't have a good time. But basically, your snake hits a wall, your snake dies. Your snake crashes into yourself, your snake dies. Your snake hits another snake, your snake dies. But another snake hits you, that snake dies. Yeah. Head-on collision, you both die. Be big snake. Great game. Just like this, Nokia 3210. Showing my age. So the reason for this talk is you could do this too. Railscamp 2020 or later in 2019. You could do this too. or you could do this instead. Guys. Tough crowd. All right. So this is kind of like in setting about writing this game. This is good tips for your Railscamp game, but it's also like good tips for Hack Day. It's good tips potentially even for your day job. So, pro tip number 1: you're writing a game. RDD. Who here? Show of hands. Who has gotten into RDD before? Yep. One person. Readme-driven development. Ooh. That's actually a real thing. That's actually a real thing. I'm like, oh my goodness. But actually by sort of setting out and going, okay, I'm going to write the README for this thing first, it kind of defined everything I wanted to achieve in the game, which actually sort of sped things along. And I came across, while researching README-driven development, but there's all sorts of like blog posts and stuff about people going, yeah, READMEs, like they're kind of important, particularly for something that you want people to pick up and get into at a Railscamp. So start with a README. Pro tip number 2. So spec out all the stuff you're likely to stuff up, which for me was, well, I've got this guy here, and you can kind of see it's collision detection. I'm gonna like, I can see it happening now. People are like, but I didn't, but I just. So I spent like a little bit of time doing collision detection. By the way, like this is like a handy little tip for RSpec. RSpec format documentation, it sort of spits out your tests like this, which is really, really handy if you're, I don't know, speaking to a bank and they're like, but you haven't written any documentation. You're like, aha, RSpec format documentation. We've written all our documentation. In fact, we've tested it all. I've heard some guy use that before. I wouldn't use it in my bank. But anyway, pro tip number 3. BYO server for your laptop, so your laptop is not it. So you want to be off socializing with people, looking at the sunset, contemplating the next rule that you're going to add to Rubocop. Unfortunately, when running these games, you get to be a little bit of a server admin. So I was kind of prepared, and I had this little guy sitting in the corner, my little snack.local. I'd strongly recommend, if you're interested in running one of these games, to bring a spare machine, a Raspberry Pi, borrow something, an extra laptop or whatever, because you need your own machine to work on and reboot and do whatever you want. And people get mad. You can see like everybody looking in and, yeah, it's offline. What the hell? Pro tip number 4. So this is the finals of Snake. As everyone sort of gathered around. You still hear that? Pro tip number 4 is actually, if you're doing sort of something like this and you want people to participate, you actually need it like up on a projector. You need it to be visible. You need to have kind of that's your call to action. That's your advertising. So people go, oh yeah, what is that thing? Yeah, I'll give that a crack. Yeah, it's got a great README. I'm in. Pro tip number 5. So engineers are awesome. Engineers are trolls in the nicest possible way, but basically, I guess being in the banking industry, things like authentication, rate limiting, IP address. So like pretty much almost immediately there's someone's like, I'm going to have 5 snakes and they're going to work together. And I'm like, no, you're not, because I work at a bank. So things like that are kind of important. You will get trolled quickly. So lock it down. So my little hack project kind of wound up looking like this. So I had like my server at snack.local. I had my beautiful Ruby on Rails app. I had like a little background process, which was just sort of a rate task. And I built the front end in React, because that's what all the cool kids are using these days. And then just Action Cable was a really, really easy way to sort of just basically stream updates down to that renderer. And that had the handy side effect that I could write less code and use that same sort of action cable process to stream the exact same updates that the renderer got down to all the people that were writing Snake clients. And then I just had to write a few little Rails controllers for when a Snake client wanted to, I want to move north, I want to move south, et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty straightforward. The actual game rate task kind of looked like this. So it's literally an endless loop. Make me a new game with a width 50, height 10, whatever. And then just action cable, you get so much for free. You can just go server broadcast to anyone that's subscribed to this channel, the game object, that'll call to JSON on the game, and Bob's your uncle. So demo time, and hopefully this should work. So the whole thing sort of kind of wound up looking like this. So I've got a few little snakes here, and they're going around and doing things. We've got Hungry Snake, he likes to eat food. Yeah, scintillating. You watch it all day. It's kind of like a lava lamp. But yeah, the thing kind of strung together. It worked. It had like a little leaderboard here. Great game. Great game. Nailed it. So it's the other thing that was really interesting actually was seeing sort of the strategies of people sort of start to figure out this game and play with it. The only snake it launched with was Random Snake, and he just moved in a random direction, eventually crashed into himself or a wall. So people kind of started devising all these really interesting strategies, which I kind of really got a kick out of. So the first meta, if you will, of Snake was hugging, which was devised by Chris Atchison, Huggy Snake. And this was kind of this concept that I'll stick to the edge of the map. I'm just sort of going to stick around to the edge of the map and be as big as I can, stuff the food. That's a trap for young players. You've got this dynamic where I grow every 5 ticks anyway. Food, nah, not into it. And this was like night 2, biggest snake was Huggy Snake. But he came into real problems when he hit sort of things like this, where things like sort of the next tile was clear, but the tile after that tile wasn't clear. And then the code started to get real nasty really quick to sort of go, okay, look at that tile and then the adjacent tiles to that tile and all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of the one major downfall of Huggy Snake, but the strategy was good. He'd have a bad time. So then kind of the next meta was attacking, and Sam Cochran's not here, but he made Cammy Snake, and you can guess what he did. Sam. Huggy Snake was doing so well until he met Cammy Snake, and the strategy of this snake was simply to look at the biggest snake and go, okay, what's 2 tiles ahead of that snake? I want to be there. So he'd just kind of do stuff like that, and he would just constantly just screw over other people. But it was actually really, really effective. So that brought on to the next strategy was kind of counterattacking. So I made my snake was Mike Snake, his best snake. I made the anti-kamikaze snake. And this is when we started to get relatively sophisticated. So, I mean, the good snake, the cop. The strategy there was to go, okay, if we take that snake and we go, okay, what's the longest path that snake could possibly take? So what's the most free space that he could possibly move into? And then go, okay, on that sequence of paths, which node can I get to first? So if you look at this node here, well, for me, that's 2 moves, 1, 2. But for Cammy Snake, that's only 1 move. So I'm not going to go there. But this one, well, I can move to this node, and it's along his sort of longest path. I can move that in only 1 square, and it's going to take him 2 squares. So I will get there first. So you would sort of do that. And effectively, he would then move up, and you would repeat until dead. So that was kind of the anti-Cammy Snake strategy. There was another really interesting one, which was compacting. So this was, again, another Chris Atchison, but this And so a big problem that a lot of snakes found themselves in is you're in a situation like this and you're sort of going like, I mean, as a human, you're like, don't go that way sucks. But you're sort of like, as a snake, you're like, okay, well, clearly I'm not going to go south because that's a wall, and I'm not going to go east because that'll back into myself, but I can go north or west. And it's actually quite tricky to work out that west is the good way to go. Sorry, that north is the good way to go in this instance.
Really
tricky. It's quite tricky to work that out. So the algorithm that Chris kind of came up with was really sort of unintuitive at first, but then once he explained it to me, I'm like, mother of God, that is genius. And I stole his code. But it was basically this. It was sort of take the farthest point from my snake, which let's say it's here, but then take the farthest point from that point and navigate to there. So in this instance, well, you'd sort of go, I mean, the farthest point from that point is this point here. So it's kind of point number one. But actually, point number two, when you sort of go, well, my snake is kind of in the way of itself to get to point number one. In other words, I block the way to get to point number one. Actually, the farthest point from this point that you can actually get to is actually point number two. So it sort of had this kind of neat side effect that snakes would kind of like double back on themselves, but never get them stuck down like a corridor, which was, I'm like, Chris, you're a genius. We should hire you, and we did. No, I already worked with Chris beforehand. So some other really interesting strats. So there was like Muncher 9000. Kieran built this snake from Adelaide, which would basically take 20 random points on the map, get whatever the furthest paths on those points were, and then kind of get what nodes were common in those paths, and then take the paths that kind of had the most nodes. And anyway, shit got complex. Great game. I'd do it again. So kind of what went well. What I was hoping for was that kind of people would get together, have a few more conversations. People would pick up things, that there'd be some sort of interesting developments. But also like people kind of sharing their love of Ruby, of different ways to sort of code things and algorithms and all that sort of stuff, like kind of why I personally got into this thing in the first place. So I was really, really happy with that. It couldn't have all been possible without the organisers. Like for me, I brought this game to camp, but it was actually Vanessa, Celia, and Sam who organised this whole thing. I put 4 evenings' work into bringing Snake along to camp. These guys put months of work into actually making camp happen, so that was huge. So thank you. And also to everyone who sort of contributed, had a crack, like Matt, I saw you around. Yeah, Matt made sound effects for Snake. I had like documentation patches. I had like one guy, he was like, Mike, I can't write a line of Ruby, but I can write CSS and yours sucks. And I'm like, hey. So it was really sort of awesome seeing those PRs come in. And another big one is, thanks to my work, I mean, they sent me there, they spied, we were able to sort of put on a little best snake competition and all that sort of stuff. So if you like Snake and like Mario Kart, we're hiring. I didn't get up before, but I did add the slide. By all means, grab me after if you'd like to hear more about banking or Snake or Mario Kart. Cheers.
Questions?
One question, one observation. The up logo looks very much like a snake. And secondly, what was your favourite snake name?
I was kind of partial to a Danger Noodle. Muncher 9000 wasn't bad too.
I may have missed this, but Was it like a kind of game off of different algorithms, or were people able to control the snakes directly?
Yeah, so Odin, anyone here know Odin, works at Counterattacking. And he wrote a arrow key controller for his snake that would allow it. So what I did was I just basically ratcheted the tick rate down, and then with the latency on screen, that was kind of enough that it was actually a real pain in the ass for him to sort of sit there for 20 minutes to make the best snake. But yeah, people wrote keyboard bindings for it.
Any other questions? No, yes, no, yes, yes.
What's your next game, Mike?
I've got a few. You have to be at the next Railscamp though to see it. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Come to the next Railscamp.
What's that?
Come to the next Railscamp.
Come to the next Railscamp. You'll see. Yeah, it's going to be good. Even better. But actually, if you, I imagine if I knew some CSS, this could have been great. Yeah, like in all seriousness, there was like a few people like, oh yeah, I would have helped you make it. Yeah, next time I wouldn't mind getting like 2 or 3 people together. You could actually probably make something a little bit more sophisticated and maybe has a bit more longevity to play. But I don't know. I'd like to do something cooperative.
Maybe a money laundering simulation.
Jesus, John. I don't condone money laundering at all. Maybe, I don't know. Could be anything. Any other questions?
Please thank Mike.